My name's Siobhan McLean, and I've been a social worker for 33 years now. I do lots of work around critically reflective practice and supporting students and new workers. So that's me. What about you, Hannah? Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Hannah. I've just come to the end of my first year studying social work at university. Um, and yeah,
Great. So really early in, I just think it's a really exciting time that. So looking towards your first placement and everything as well, aren't you? So it's a really exciting time. So we're doing this video because Hannah's lecturer contact, or one of your lecturers, wasn't it, Hannah, contacted me about a tool really that you developed. So it started off as a tool, didn't it? And then she was really impressed by that. And so the three of us met, and then you and I have met, and we've been talking quite a lot about it. But this is very visual, so we thought we need to show people this on video, don't we? So I know in conversation, we'll perhaps have a chat about it, perhaps talk about how it could be used. But if you want to kickstart us by telling us a little bit about where this came from, what you did with it, how you developed it, that would be fabulous. So, do you want to tell us all about it, Hannah?
yeah, thank you. So we've at the end of our first year of studying, we are invited to present to an expert by experience, a social worker, and our academic advisor. And we have to deliver a presentation on our experience of the year so far, areas that kind of stuck for us, or any models that we particularly liked, and just really to sort of talk about our reflections on the year. And we're also encouraged to bring in an aid to support it, to support the learning as a metaphor. And I was sort of thinking about what my aid in my presentation would be. I have ADHD, so I wanted something that was going to sort of support that, as well as my nerves around not knowing my audience. So what I thought would be a good idea was bringing in an object that my audience could play with, touch, a tactile aid for me and for them. That way, it would sort of break any awkwardness that may be in the room, but also sort of act as an icebreaker that I would also get a little bit of feedback from them who they are, because at the moment I didn't know who they were going to be. Um, and so I created something that would sort of be a little bit more bespoke to my learning journey. In our presentation, we had to give examples of how we've met the professional capabilities framework, how we've considered the code of ethics and social work England standards. So I wanted something to incorporate all of that. So then I presented this box. So this is the box, it's very visual. And I called it my box of knowledge at the time. So I brought that in and I handed it over to my audience. And I wanted it to sort of be a bit of a metaphor for how I wanted, what style I wanted my practice to be, or to start showing that I'm thinking about how I'm going to be in practice. And one of the key things that I really picked up on throughout my first year was the power imbalance that had come from the historical side of social work. And I really, really want to undress that when I go into practice. So here's my box of knowledge. And I thought, great, I'll hand it over to my audience and then they'll open it up. And then inside, as the first layer, it would be something that they could see. So, for example, I've got all of the, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 PCS, professional capabilities frameworks on there. And then the idea was going to be that expert by experience would lift the lid off, they would see these PCFs, and then they would choose the information that they wanted to hear. Because it's sort of as a metaphor is that I'm not going to go into practice giving you information. I'm going to go and practice listening to what you want from me, and it's my job to deliver that information, what you need. So they would then choose which PCF they would like to hear an example of how I've met it throughout the year or how I've thought about it. For example, we've got professionalism. So if they were to have chosen professionalism, then I would give them an example throughout the year of how I've developed my profession, that PCF throughout the year of studying. Mm-hmm. And another key thing for me was I didn't know who my audience were going to be. So I really wanted it to be as accessible as possible. So I put some bump-ons around the edge, so that it was, I wasn't sure if there was going to be any accessibility requirements or anything that needed to be considered. So it's high contrast for the text as well as bump-on, so they could feel when it was a bit more tactile. And then I would take the lid off. On top of the lid, I've got some of the code of ethics as well, so they could choose one of those. And then as you open it up, we've got more PCFs coming down, as well as then I started to look at Siobhan's model, weather model. So I tweaked it a little bit so that it reflected the year. So I put areas that I've developed and along with the other PCF. So they could then choose what they wanted to hear from me. The other thing as well, the time was quite restricted, so I couldn't go through all of the PCFs and all of the code of ethics, but I had the knowledge up here. It was just, yeah, for them to choose what they would wanted to hear. So I thought it was quite a nice way to sort of break that awkwardness of the of just presenting and talking at people.
Mm-hmm.
And then as you take off the other lid, I've got areas that I developed this time next year, what I'm looking to achieve, what I'm looking forward to. And then I've got another area that's a little bit more tactile, is Social Work England standards. And then more bump-ons around the side. And then you lift that off. And then just to make it a little bit personal to the audience so that they felt included and I wasn't just talking at them, I said, thank you for listening. And then inside they would take the lid off, the last box, and there would be a little thank you note with each of their names on inside, just to thank them for their time, because I really appreciate the people that we're going to be working with. It's time that's really precious, and I really wanted them to know that I really appreciated them being a part of my learning journey and giving their time here as well as in practice. I want people to know that I really appreciate them sharing their time, their home with me. So hopefully it gives a bit of an idea.
See, I think it's fabulous, and I can see why your lecturers contacted me to say, that you'd come up with this and it was very different and worked really well. And there's lots of different aspects to it that then you and I have talked about, haven't we, and how it might be developed and how it might be utilised. But I even just love the fact that, as you said, you've got ADHD, and it's therefore, I think, one of the problems with lots of the models of reflection that we have, lots of ways in which people might be traditionally expected to present something, is very neurotypical and doesn't take account of diversity. And I think the way that you've developed that really shows that. There's lots of strengths within it. But then we've talked, haven't we, about how it could be used in different ways. So I think you've had ideas about maybe using it in direct work, in therapeutic work, but something that we hadn't even spoken about before we've started recording this, that's just come to me as you're presenting it to me again. And almost each time I hear about it, I think, it could be used like this, it could be used like that. But I was thinking about a student going through placement. One of the things we really want students on placement to do is reflect on their experiences, think about what they've done. And you could almost build one of these and have it blank going into placement, because okay, you're bringing lots of experiences into placement, and you could, if you wanted to show that, almost write that on the outside, what you're bringing to the placement, to demonstrate you're not, we don't come as empty vessels. We come with lots of experience. But then as you open it out, it could be that each experience the student feels that was a real learning point for me, or that was, even something I read that really worked, or just something, so that you could add to it throughout a placement. And by the end of placement, this has grown, and it started off, didn't it, as a box. But I don't know if you want to tell people, we had a bit of a conversation and I didn't see it as a box, did I, when you were opening it out? And so you calling it something different now. So I don't know if you want to talk that through.
Yeah, when I delivered the presentation for my VIVA, I was really struck by the feedback. One of the expert by experience, their son was autistic, and they started to come up with all these lovely ideas of how this could be used in therapeutic services and how their son would really benefit from the tool. And then my lecturer, she contacted you, and then when we had our meeting, it was fantastic hearing your feedback, but also how it's grown to something that other people could benefit from. And when you were speaking about these areas that come down, you said that one of them are like petals. And I love that idea, because when I look at it, it looks like a lotus flower. And the idea of the lotus flower, of it coming through the murky waters, is so, it just sounds like a reflection. Like when we have these ideas that come through, we might not make sense of them at the time that they come through, but using a model, or maybe this model, you're able to start grow through that reflection, understand it a little bit. And I really loved that idea when you said the petal, because I thought looks like a lotus flower, and the metaphor is fantastic. And with these, when you're talking about sort of studying and for students as they're going through and adding it for their experiences, there's also little flaps in here. So we did talk about several areas that this could be helpful. So for supervision throughout your whole year, when you're getting ready to do your, when you're renewing your license, you could put in little examples of how you've met that PCF yourself throughout the year, because you may not remember a particular interaction that you had, but if you put the little examples in there, you don't have to particularly remember it. And there's that area, but there's also that area for students as well to add the examples in. And because you can make it yourself, you could add layers and layers and layers. You don't have to have as many layers as I've got. You could have just a couple. And as you're saying, you can add them as you go through. There's so many areas that I think this could really help. But yeah, I don't know what your ideas are.
I just love the fact it's very creative, because I think one of the things I think is really important in social work is that we think about creativity in our practice, you know. And I think sometimes some of the sort of contemporary ways in which we're pushed into working can be a bit process driven, a bit proceduralized, and we can lose that level of creativity, which I think is really important. And you know, it's one of the things that Shern talked about in his original book about reflective practice, was that need for creativity. But he also talked about the best kind of reflection comes from surprise or puzzlement. And when you sent me the link, didn't you, to you actually bought that kind of, so it's a template that's sort of ready made and you can make, you sent me the link to that, and when I looked at it, it was all about the surprise of the box. It was the advert for it was about this being surprising, and I was thinking, well, that's where reflection comes from. And you could use it, as you said, you could use it as a tool in supervision for thinking about different, you know, take it into supervision, and the one week the practice educator chooses what to talk about out of there, and the next week the student chooses. Or you could use it as a learning tool, even just to think about, I don't know, if you really wanting to delve into what a theory means, a particular theory. Sometimes when we're learning about theory, and you know that's one of my things, but when we're learning about theory, we just learn the headline, we don't really learn what's underneath it. And if you have the box, you can almost use, you know, well, this is what the theory says, but when you unpack it, there's all of these different aspects to it. So it's about, I think, recognizing that certainly when you see the box to start with, it just looks like this tiny little thing, but there's so much inside. And that's what social work is. You know, it looks actually quite straightforward, but inside there's so much to it, and so many aspects and so many components. And I suppose I think that I would see this as a model of reflection, as a tool and technique that we could use in so many different ways, particularly where someone is neurodivergent and Gibbs just says, here, what went well, what didn't go well, what will you do differently next time? And you've just got that cycle. There's a role for that. There's definitely a role for that for some people, but it doesn't work for everybody. And being able to be creative, I think, is really helpful. So, and yes, I sent off, I have my little blank one here that I can fold up and use. But also I think what we're going to try and do is work out a bit of a template that could be used and cut out for yourself, really, aren't we? Or look at how this could be created, even just a small part of this. You don't have to use, as you said, all of the layers, but even a small part. And I wondered whether this could be a really good tool for direct work around life stories. you know. I think increasingly now life story work is done online and digitally, and that's helpful. And I can see why, but it almost doesn't give, you know, some children do like that tactile experience of building something together. And I can see how you could use this as a tool to look at, you know, where a child is now, but where a child has come from and all the different things that go about making them. And that could be their box, that could be their life story contained in there. And it has those little pockets where little things could be put in. And so I can see so many different ways of using this to be more creative in what we do as social workers. So, you know, I love the idea. And what was really funny wasn't it, that you or your lecturer contacted me literally when I was in the midst of writing about reflective practice, and the book is now almost finished, and this video will also go into the book. But it was just really timely that it came in at that point. And the fact that you've been able to write about the model and explain the model, and we've put that into the book, but we've also done this video to show it because it is so visual. How do you write about it in a way that someone needs to see it, you know, and you almost want to feel it and touch it and grab it? And that's what makes it exciting, you know. And social work should be exciting, and the direct work we do therapeutically should be exciting. But I can see so many ways of using something like this in social work. So
yeah, and I think as well, it's fun. And I think what I have this vision in my head at the moment where I'm thinking for supervision, you know, time's so hard to get when you're in practice from what I'm learning. And I'm just imagining that you're coming in and you've got your supervision, and it's because of it being a physical tool, that's almost separating your work from your supervision. Your supervision is a sacred time and it's around the box. And it's also, it could work as a dynamic thing. So it could work with the supervisor and supporting the supervisor as well as the social worker. And I really like that idea. And when you were saying about children and their life stories, that's a really great idea as well. Because I know that when we did something at university where we had a stick and then we wrote like poignant moments in our lives. And it was surprising how many things you've forgotten. Whereas if you're doing something like this, you can just add it in. And yeah, like you say, you can add little things like little trinkets into the pockets. But again, with a therapeutic service for children, I'm thinking in like schools and things like that. I think it'd be really great because you may have a child that may not necessarily know how to verbally communicate what's going on for them. Whereas if they have an aid that they can illustrate and make their own, it can be quite empowering because they don't need to have a conversation with somebody. They don't have to sit there. There's no pressure around having a two-way conversation or having to deliver something. Because they could just illustrate their box of how they're feeling or what they want. You can get a lot from that, as I imagine, as a therapist from their illustrations alone. But I've got high hopes for this. I think it can be really supportive for people. I really hope so.
Well, it'd be fabulous, wouldn't it, to get feedback from people, to hear
Yeah.
people if they've used it or ideas that they have. So, and I think on the video we'll try and put some links in so that people are able to let us know, and maybe we can see pictures of people using things as well. But I think, you know, there were so many different things that you did in yours that I think show the way that you developed this, show lots of aspects around the importance of social work. So I love the fact that, and of course you've covered them up now when you showed them to us, but on the front of the box it said welcome, and then it had the names of the people that you were going to be meeting. And I think that that's really important, is that personalized way of looking at things. And I think that, you know, thinking about the tactile nature of putting things on, and that you know, the way in which you've used the visual techniques within it. I just think it's fabulous, and I think it shows such a lot. So that whole idea of creativity, and for a lot of people as well, I think increasingly now we've got to find spaces in which to reflect, and sometimes I find I am much more reflective if I'm doing something, if I'm I don't know, I just started to learn to crochet last week. I'm terrible at it, but I'm going to stick with it. So just something like that you're actually making and doing, it actually clears your mind of everything else. So sitting down with the basis of one of these to build it could also just give, I think, workers that space, that time to stop and think. And sometimes that's what reflection is about, is stopping and thinking. So there's so many aspects of reflection that come out in your model. I love the idea. I love the very tactile nature of it. And hopefully we've shown the tactile nature of it on the video. So thank you very much for sharing the model with us, Hannah, and I hope the video will be useful to people.
Thank you. Thank you very much.